It was supposed to be the perfect celebration. A lavish baby shower, champagne in hand, friends gathered around, and Richard standing proudly beside his beautiful, pregnant wife. But when the door opened, all eyes turned as his childless ex-wife, Vanessa, walked in. Not alone, but with twins. His twins. Twins that looked exactly like him. Before we dive into this intense story, make sure to leave a comment telling us where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling narratives like this one. Now, sit back and enjoy every twist and turn. The atmosphere at the baby shower was exactly what Richard Harper had envisioned. Champagne flutes clinked, laughter echoed across the grand ballroom, and guests complimented him on his new life, his perfect new wife, Olivia, and their soon-to-arrive baby girl. Everything was falling into place, until the door opened. Richard's jaw dropped when Vanessa, his ex-wife, stepped inside. But she wasn't just making an appearance. She had brought twins with her. And those twins? They looked eerily familiar. Richard's heart stopped as he realized that these children, these twin boys, were not just any kids. They were his. The room went silent, and suddenly Richard's picture-perfect life was in danger of crumbling. Let's rewind for a moment. Richard had always believed that Vanessa, his first wife, had failed him. She had been unable to give him children, something he had always seen as a deal-breaker in their marriage. After their divorce, he moved on, marrying Olivia, someone younger, beautiful, and, most importantly, fertile. But what Richard didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that Vanessa had a secret that would rock his world and change everything he thought he knew about family, love, and the choices he had made. As the truth began to unfold, Richard's mind raced. The twins were his, but how could this be? How had he not known? What had Vanessa been hiding, and why hadn't she told him? But to understand what led to this shocking moment, we need to go back in time. Let's take a closer look at how everything spiraled, and the decisions that would change Richard's life forever. Richard sat at his desk, his fingers drumming rhythmically against the polished wood. His mind raced, caught in the haze of satisfaction that came with building an empire, marrying a younger, more beautiful woman, and living the picture-perfect life he had always dreamed of. The kind of life he had earned by outsmarting, outworking, and outlasting everyone who doubted him. But even the perfect life had its blemishes. Richard had never been able to shake the nagging feeling that he had left something, or rather someone, behind. His ex-wife, Vanessa. The woman he had walked away from, not because he didn't love her, but because she couldn't give him the one thing he wanted most: children. For years, their marriage had been marred by her inability to conceive. The fertility treatments, the constant doctor visits, the late-night tears. He couldn't take it anymore. They had tried everything. In his mind, it was a lost cause, and he needed to move on. Now, with Olivia by his side, pregnant with his child, he felt invincible. The world was his, and he was going to rub that in Vanessa's face. That's when it hit him. The idea that would give him the final sense of triumph. The baby shower invitation. It wasn't about inviting Vanessa for the sake of civility or goodwill. No, this was about something deeper, something vindictive. Richard was no fool. He knew exactly what he was doing. He would invite her, not out of kindness, but as a subtle jab, a chance to flaunt his perfect life and rub her failure in her face. If she had been incapable of giving him children, why should she get to be part of his new family? Why should she witness the joy of his new wife Olivia and their soon-to-arrive baby? He leaned forward, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. He could already picture her reaction. She would come, of course. She had nowhere else to be. And he would be there, standing proudly beside Olivia, showing off everything she couldn't provide. Richard was confident that this would be the final blow in their long and messy history. Richard began typing the invitation on his laptop, carefully crafting each word. His fingers danced over the keys as he typed, each stroke deliberate, each sentence carefully designed to hit Vanessa where it would hurt most. The tone of the invitation was polite, but laced with the undertone of superiority he felt over her. He knew Vanessa would read between the lines. She wasn't foolish. She would know exactly why she had been invited. It was a chance for him to show her how perfect his life had become without her. How perfect his new wife, Olivia, was. How perfect their unborn child would be. Dear Vanessa, we'd like to formally invite you to join us at our baby shower, celebrating the upcoming arrival of our daughter. The event will be held at the Grand Suite on May 14th, and we hope you'll be able to join us for an afternoon of champagne, gourmet food, and heartfelt conversation. This occasion promises to be a celebration of new beginnings, and we'd love for you to share this special day with us. Warm regards, Richard Harper. Richard sat back, rereading the words with satisfaction. He clicked send without hesitation. The invitation had been delivered. Vanessa sat alone in her living room, a cup of tea cooling beside her as she sifted through the pile of mail. She'd been feeling a sense of contentment lately, a peace she hadn't known for years. After the divorce from Richard, she had built a new life for herself, one where she didn't have to live in the shadow of his expectations. She had become stronger, more resilient, and above all, independent. The woman who once thought her world had crumbled now stood tall, a woman who had learned to embrace the life she had carved out for herself. But today, as she flipped through the letters, one envelope stood out. It was from Richard. The handwriting was unmistakable. She hesitated, the weight of the envelope in her hands suddenly feeling like an anchor. She had no idea what he could want. They hadn't spoken in years, not since their bitter divorce. There had been no attempts at reconciliation, no pleas to revisit their past. Nothing. The silence had been mutual. Yet here he was, sending her an invitation to his baby shower. She almost laughed at the irony. Richard, the man who had discarded her for not being able to give him children, was now inviting her to witness the fruits of his perfect life. It almost felt like a taunt. Vanessa set the envelope down on the coffee table and took a long, steadying breath. She knew what this invitation was meant to be, a reminder of all the things he had cast aside. She could already imagine his smug smile as he introduced Olivia, pregnant with his child, and how he would glance over at her, almost daring her to feel the sting of her perceived failure. Her fingers traced the edge of the invitation as she sat back against the couch. A thought crossed her mind. A dangerous thought, one she hadn't allowed herself to entertain until now. What if she went? What if she showed up at that baby shower and turned the tables? She could already picture it, the moment when Richard's perfect world came crashing down. He would see her, standing there with a child in tow, a child that looked just like him. It was a power move, and Vanessa was ready to take it. But that wasn't the only reason she was considering going. She had a secret. Something Richard didn't know. Something that had been quietly building in her life for the past few years. She wasn't the same woman he had left behind. She was stronger, wiser, and she had something that would shatter Richard's carefully constructed image. She had his children. With a decisive breath, Vanessa stood up, grabbed her purse, and began to prepare. She had no intention of being a spectator in this game anymore. She would show Richard exactly what it meant to walk away from something you didn't fully understand. As she stepped into the bedroom to choose what to wear, she reflected on how much had changed. How far she had come since Richard had dismissed her, made her feel like she wasn't enough. He had never known how much she had to fight for everything she now had. And now, she was going to make sure he understood the cost of his arrogance. Vanessa's mind raced as she prepared for the day ahead. She wasn't just going to attend this baby shower, she was going to make an entrance. Richard's perfect life would soon collide with the reality of the secret she'd kept hidden for so long. As she looked into the mirror, she saw a woman who had grown far beyond the expectations placed on her. She was no longer the meek woman Richard had discarded. No, now she was the woman who would leave him speechless. And with that thought, she closed the door behind her and left the apartment, ready to confront the past she had worked so hard to leave behind. This was it. Richard would soon find out the truth. The day of the baby shower had arrived, and the grand suite was the picture of opulence. A symphony of laughter, champagne bubbles, and sparkling lights filled the air as Richard stood at the center of it all. His guests marveled at the extravagant decorations, the crisp white linens, the gilded accents, and the towering floral arrangements that adorned every table. Every detail was meticulously planned, and everything was going exactly as he had envisioned. Richard smiled as he watched Olivia, radiant in her pregnancy glow, mingle with the guests. She was beautiful, young, and carrying their baby. A perfect addition to his picture-perfect life. She made small talk with the other women, effortlessly charming everyone around her with her warmth and grace. Richard had chosen well. Olivia was everything Vanessa hadn't been. A symbol of his new life, of success, of the family he had always wanted. Richard basked in the admiration of his friends and colleagues. As he held a glass of champagne, he couldn't help but think how far he had come. His tech empire was thriving, his marriage was flawless, and now he was about to welcome a daughter into the world. Life was good. The conversation around him buzzed with the usual praise. "You're going to make a great father, Richard. Olivia, you look stunning, as always. I'm sure your daughter will be just as beautiful as her mother." He smiled, nodding politely. For all the glitz and glamour, for all the success, this moment felt like the culmination of everything he had worked for. It was validation, the final chapter in a story he had written for himself. But in the midst of the congratulations and the laughter, Richard couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something, or rather someone, missing. That's when it happened. The door to the grand suite opened, and the murmur of voices stilled for a split second. Richard glanced over, his smile frozen as he saw who had entered. Vanessa, his ex-wife. She walked in with quiet confidence, but it wasn't her presence that made Richard's heart skip a beat. It was the fact that she wasn't alone. At her side were two young boys. They were small, no more than 5 or 6 years old, their eyes wide with curiosity. They wore matching outfits, a crisp white shirt and khaki pants, and each held the hand of Vanessa, their mother. Richard's pulse quickened as his eyes scanned them, his gaze slowly creeping toward the two boys standing so innocently by her side. There was something about them, something too familiar. His stomach churned as he took a step back. The twins. They both had his green eyes, the same piercing shade of jade that had always been his trademark. Their faces were soft, but undeniably his jawline, his cheekbones. It was as if he were looking at a reflection of his own youth, two versions of himself standing in front of him. He felt the room grow colder. The chatter died. All eyes shifted toward the entrance, where Vanessa and the two children stood. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of disbelief. Vanessa, ever composed, smiled gently at the guests, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the shock that had taken hold of Richard's face. "Hello, everyone," Vanessa said, her voice steady and clear. She paused as the twins looked up at her, their little hands still gripping hers. "These are my sons. Richard's sons." The words hit Richard like a slap to the face. The room was silent. The crowd turned to Richard, who was frozen, unable to speak. His perfect life, the one he had carefully crafted with Olivia by his side, was unraveling before his eyes. He blinked, trying to process the scene in front of him. Was this some kind of joke? A twisted prank? But there was no laughter, no glint of mischief in Vanessa's eyes. She wasn't playing a game. She wasn't trying to humiliate him for the sake of it. No, this was real. The twins, his biological children, were standing right in front of him. Richard's chest tightened. He could barely breathe. He turned toward Olivia, whose expression mirrored the shock on his face. Olivia's mouth opened slightly, her eyes wide with confusion, but she said nothing. She didn't know. She hadn't been told. Vanessa stepped forward, the twins in tow. She looked directly at Richard, a look of calm determination on her face. "I know this must be a shock to you," she continued, her voice unshaken. "But these boys are yours. I know you didn't want them to be, and I know you'll probably deny it. But they are. They've always been. You just never knew." Richard's mind raced, his thoughts crashing into each other in a whirl of disbelief. He shook his head, trying to process what he was hearing. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice unsteady. Vanessa's gaze softened, but there was no pity in it, no sympathy, just a quiet resolve. "After we divorced, I used the embryos we had stored together. I never contacted you, Richard. I never wanted you to be involved because I knew you didn't want these children. I knew you had moved on, and I didn't want them to grow up knowing a man who rejected them before they were even born." Richard's heart pounded in his chest. His breath quickened as he struggled to find his voice. This couldn't be real. You had them? You had our children and never told me?" Vanessa nodded, her eyes unwavering. "I thought it would be better this way. For them. But now they're here, and they deserve to know you. Whether you want to be a part of their lives or not." The twins stood beside her, still clutching her hands, their innocent faces oblivious to the storm that was raging inside their father's chest. Richard's mind was reeling, but nothing made sense. How could this be happening? How could Vanessa have kept this from him? The room around them seemed to spin. He could feel the stares of his guests, the weight of their gaze pressing down on him. The champagne he had so eagerly poured seemed distant, almost irrelevant now. The life he had worked so hard to perfect, his perfect image, his perfect marriage, was slipping away like sand through his fingers. "Vanessa." Richard's voice was hoarse, his words barely a whisper. "How could you do this?" Vanessa met his gaze, her expression one of quiet strength. "I did what was best for them. And now they know their father. Now you know the truth." There it was, the moment of reckoning. His life, his perfect life, was no longer perfect. His world, once so carefully constructed, was crumbling before him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The twins stood, their wide green eyes staring up at him, unaware of the emotional chaos they had just unleashed. But Richard knew. And deep down, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The room was suffocating. The air, once filled with the chatter of friends and the pop of champagne bottles, was now heavy with silence. Richard's heart raced in his chest, his mind spiraling in 1,000 different directions. The twins, his twins, stood before him, their wide eyes locked onto him, waiting for some kind of recognition. But Richard couldn't give them that. He couldn't give them anything. He turned to Vanessa, his mind in turmoil. How could this be happening? How could she have kept this from him all these years? He was drowning in questions, in disbelief. The reality of the situation seemed impossible, like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He had always been careful, always in control. He had crafted his life to perfection, to the image of success, to the family he had always dreamed of with Olivia. And now, this bombshell had shattered it all. Vanessa, however, remained calm. Her face was steady, her posture unflinching as she stood there with the boys beside her. She was the only one not caught in the chaos, the only one who seemed entirely composed. "I know this is a lot to process," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But you need to understand how this happened. The twins, they're your biological children." Richard's pulse hammered in his ears as he looked at the children again. They had his eyes, his jawline. It was undeniable. He had always hoped, no, assumed, that if he had children, they would look like him. But this was not how he had envisioned it. These children had no place in his perfect world. "Vanessa," Richard began, his voice thick with frustration. "How could you do this? Why didn't you tell me?" She sighed, her gaze unwavering. "Because I knew you wouldn't want them. You made it clear when we were together that children weren't something you wanted with me. You made it clear when we divorced that I was the reason our marriage failed. You wanted to start fresh, and so did I." Richard clenched his fists at his sides, the tension in his body mounting. "So, you just kept them from me?" His voice trembled, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. Vanessa nodded, her eyes softening, but her resolve was unshakable. "I did. I used the embryos we had stored. After the divorce, I went through IVF, using one of them. It worked. And I had these boys, Richard." She paused, looking down at the twins. "I raised them on my own, because I believed that they deserved a mother who would give them everything, not a father who couldn't even acknowledge their existence." Richard's chest tightened. The idea of those embryos, of the possibility that they were alive and breathing, had never crossed his mind. He had been too focused on his own life, too wrapped up in his ambitions and his new, shiny future with Olivia. The thought that there was a part of him, two parts of him, living across the country, growing up without him, was too much to process. This can't be real," Richard stammered, his voice thick with denial. "This can't be happening." Vanessa's expression didn't waver. "It's happening, Richard, and it's time you face it." A rush of anger surged through him, a desperate need to regain control, to make this situation something he could handle. His mind scrambled, searching for an explanation, for a way out of this overwhelming truth. He turned toward the guests, who were now whispering amongst themselves. The laughter and cheer that had once filled the room were now replaced with hushed tones, as if they all knew what was unfolding but couldn't quite understand it. Richard took a step back, trying to find his footing in a world that suddenly felt unrecognizable. "I need a paternity test," he demanded, his voice rising slightly, trying to drown out the voice of reason creeping into his thoughts. "I need proof. I'm not going to just accept this." Vanessa didn't flinch. She had expected this. She knew Richard well enough to understand that this moment, this truth, would not be something he would accept easily. But she had no intention of backing down. "You don't need a test, Richard," she said calmly. "They're your children. You can see it in their faces. The paternity test won't change the fact that these boys are yours. You have no excuse for not knowing them. They deserve to know you, whether you like it or not." Richard's breath quickened as he looked at the twins again. He had no answer. His mind was still racing, trying to piece together how his life had been derailed so suddenly. He couldn't focus on the twins, on their faces staring up at him, so full of innocence and possibility. Instead, he could only hear the whispers of his guests, could only feel the weight of their judgment. His perfect world, the one he had carefully curated, was slipping through his fingers. "No," Richard muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "I refuse to accept this." He turned sharply to Olivia, who had been watching the exchange in stunned silence. "Olivia, tell me this isn't happening. Tell me this isn't real." Olivia, still standing beside him, looked at the twins with wide eyes, her face pale with shock. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. She couldn't bring herself to speak. Richard's chest tightened, his emotions churning violently within him. He had built his life with Olivia by his side, and now she was the one he needed, the one who was supposed to make everything right again. But there was no comfort in her gaze, no reassurance in her silence. Vanessa's voice cut through the tension, calm and steady as ever. "Richard," she said softly, "you can't hide from this. You can't undo what's been done. They are your sons, and they deserve to know their father." The room remained frozen, the whispers growing louder now. Richard felt like a spectator in his own life, watching as everything he thought he knew fell apart. The questions piled up. How had this happened? Why hadn't he been told? Why had Vanessa kept this secret? But it didn't matter now. The truth was in front of him, undeniable, and there was no turning back. I don't know what to do," Richard whispered, his voice breaking as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He was lost. He had no answers. Vanessa regarded him with a quiet understanding, but there was no pity in her eyes. "You don't have to do anything right now. Just know that the decision to be a father, to be a part of their lives, lies with you." The tension in the room was suffocating, and Richard's mind spun in a frenzy. He had never been good at dealing with the things that made him feel vulnerable, that made him question his control. And this was the ultimate test. As the twins stood beside Vanessa, their innocent eyes searching his face, Richard felt the enormity of the moment settle in. His world, the world he had carefully built around him, was no longer the same. And no amount of denial, no amount of deflection could change that. The room remained silent, the weight of the moment pressing in on him from all sides. The only thing Richard knew for sure was that he couldn't escape it. This was his reality now. Richard's heart was pounding, but he barely noticed the sensation. His entire being was consumed by one overwhelming urge: to deny, to fight back, to push away the reality of the situation. Vanessa had just dropped a bombshell at his baby shower, and now, in front of all these people, he was supposed to accept it? His mind was reeling. There was no way he could accept these children as his. He had built his entire life around the idea of perfection. He was the billionaire tech mogul with a flawless image, the doting husband to Olivia, and the proud father-to-be of their first child together. This mess didn't fit into the perfect narrative he had created. As the twins stood there beside Vanessa, gazing up at him with eyes too similar to his own, Richard's world felt like it was collapsing in on him. He could feel the walls closing in, the whispers of the guests, the sound of the champagne glasses clinking together in awkward silence. Everything became a blur. The truth was now right in front of him, but Richard wasn't ready to face it. "I want a paternity test," he blurted, his voice cutting through the tense silence like a knife. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, the corners of her mouth lifting in the faintest of smiles. There was no anger in her, no desperation. She simply stood there, calm as ever, holding the hands of the two boys, the evidence of her truth. "A paternity test," she repeated, her voice steady, almost amused. "Richard, The test will only confirm what you already know. These boys are yours." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. They simply watched, unsure of how to react to the unfolding drama. Richard's demand hung in the air like an accusation, an attempt to seize control of the situation. But Vanessa was unfazed. "Why are you doing this?" Richard snapped, his frustration now bubbling over. His eyes darted to Olivia, who stood frozen beside him, her face pale, her lips pressed together in a thin line. He felt the weight of her gaze on him, the silent judgment, but it only added to his panic. Vanessa's eyes never left him. "Because I want you to face the consequences, Richard," she said quietly. "The consequences of your actions. You need to stop running from the past and stop pretending it doesn't matter." Richard's breath hitched. "I'm not pretending. I'm just—" He faltered, trying to find the words. "This can't be true. It just can't." Vanessa exhaled slowly, her calm demeanor unwavering. "I know you don't want to believe it, but that doesn't change the truth. These boys are yours, and the truth is right in front of you." She stepped closer to him, her voice lowering but still firm. "It's time to stop pretending that your choices didn't have consequences." His mind was spinning. He had always prided himself on being in control, on never letting his emotions get the best of him. But now, with everything unraveling, he could feel the grip he once had slipping away. The guests in the room were murmuring, their faces a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Olivia stood beside him, her hand gripping his arm, but she said nothing. Richard could feel the heat of embarrassment spreading across his face. He had always been able to handle anything, crisis after crisis at work, public challenges, but this was different. This was personal, and he wasn't prepared for it. "I'm doing this," Richard said, his voice sharp, "because I need proof. I need to know that you're not lying." Vanessa's expression softened, but there was no sympathy in her gaze. "You think I'm lying?" she asked, her voice almost incredulous. "Richard, I don't need to lie to you. These children, your children, are standing right in front of you." She looked at the twins and then back at him, her tone unwavering. "I did this on my own. I didn't need you, and I didn't want to drag you into this. But you need to face what you've done, the way you treated me, the way you discarded me, and now it's time for you to take responsibility." Richard stood there, motionless, his mind a tangled mess of thoughts. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to make the truth go away, but he couldn't. He couldn't run from this. Not anymore. The twins stood beside Vanessa, their small hands gripping hers as they looked up at Richard. They were the picture of innocence, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing around them. Richard couldn't look at them. He didn't want to see the reflection of himself in their faces. It was too much. "Just say it," Vanessa pressed. "Say that they're yours. Accept it." Richard's throat tightened. The throat words didn't come. He couldn't bring himself to speak. The silence in the room grew unbearable. His guests, once admiring his wealth and success, were now witnesses to his humiliation. He wanted to escape, to run away from the shame, but he couldn't. His life was in front of him, unraveling in real time. He turned to Olivia, his wife, his partner in this perfect world he had built. She was standing beside him, her eyes wide, her hands trembling. She was hurt, he could see that. And for a moment, just a brief moment, Richard's heart twisted with guilt. He had never meant for any of this to happen. He had never meant for her to be part of this mess. But she was. They all were. "Olivia," he began, his voice weak, I didn't know." Olivia didn't respond. She just stared at him, her face unreadable. Richard's chest tightened. He wanted to make it right. He wanted to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was too much for him to bear. As the paternity test demand echoed through the room, Richard's perfect world began to crumble. The celebration he had envisioned for months, the baby shower meant to honor his growing family, had turned into a spectacle of failure. He had invited Vanessa to mock her, to show off his new life, and instead, he had found himself exposed, vulnerable, uncertain, and no longer in control. The awkwardness in the room was palpable. No one knew what to say or do. The guests had shifted uncomfortably in their seats, no longer pretending to be entertained by the lavish decor or the champagne. Their eyes were on Richard, the billionaire tech mogul who had spent years building an empire, and now, here he was, stripped of his bravado, unable to defend his carefully constructed life. Vanessa's voice cut through the tension, calm and resolute. "The test won't change anything, Richard. These boys are yours. You can't deny them any longer." The words stung, but they were the truth. Vanessa wasn't looking for validation. She wasn't asking for anything from him. She was simply stating the facts. And as much as Richard hated to admit it, he knew she was right. As the tension in the room reached a boiling point, Richard could no longer bear the weight of the moment. He looked at Olivia, then at Vanessa, and then at the twins. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words never came. Instead, he stood there, a man broken by his own arrogance and a truth he couldn't deny. And with that, the baby shower, once a celebration of a new life, came to an abrupt and painful end. Richard's perfect world had shattered, and he was left standing at the center of the wreckage, unsure of who he was or what he was supposed to do next. Richard couldn't remember when the weight of the truth had settled in. It had come on slowly, at first, a creeping discomfort at the edges of his perfect world. The twins were his, that much was undeniable, but accepting it had proven far harder than he ever imagined. Now, with the DNA results in his hand, he was left staring at the harsh reality that his past arrogance had cost him more than he was willing to acknowledge. The envelope sat on his desk, unopened. His hand hovered over it, the words on the outside mocking him. DNA test results. The truth is here. Richard had thought he could ignore the facts. He had believed, even as he demanded the test, that there was some way to erase the consequences of his past. But now, as he sat alone in his luxurious office, the result was inevitable. His mind raced back to the baby shower, the moment Vanessa had walked in, twins in tow, and how everything had shifted in an instant. At first, he had denied it, demanded the test as though to control the situation, to make it go away. But now, he couldn't escape it. The test had confirmed the one thing he had hoped wasn't true. Richard ripped the envelope open with trembling hands and pulled out the paper. His gaze fell immediately on the key lines. The children in question are indeed the biological offspring of Richard Harper. The breath left his chest in a slow, disbelieving exhale. His perfect world, his carefully constructed life, had just cracked open. He read the lines again, unable to escape the weight of their meaning. These boys are his. His mind raced, but for a few moments there was nothing but a suffocating silence. Richard sat back in his leather chair, staring at the results as though they might somehow change if he waited long enough. But nothing changed. The truth was still there. The twins are his children. The shame came in waves, each one crashing over him. He couldn't stop the images from flashing in his mind, the way he had mocked Vanessa for years, calling her childless, making her feel inadequate. It was as if he had spent the entire marriage trying to convince himself that his perfect image, his perfect life, was all that mattered. And now, in this quiet moment of reckoning, the cost of that perfect image hit him harder than he could have imagined. Vanessa had been right all along. She had done everything on her own, raised these boys without him, and had never asked for his help. She hadn't needed him. She had chosen to keep the children from him, not because she wanted to punish him, but because he had rejected her before they were even born. Richard had never given her a chance to be a mother, had never considered that the family she wanted to build with him might have been something she could still have. Instead, he had dismissed her, convinced that his career and his perfect life with Olivia were the only things worth living for. As Richard sat there, guilt gnawing at him, he couldn't shake the image of Vanessa and the boys. They were his children, and he had ignored them for their entire lives. The twins, his sons, were standing out there, living proof of his own failure. They didn't know him, didn't care to know him, and Richard had never given them the chance. In the days that followed, the weight of his actions only grew heavier. The media had picked up on the scandal, the story of the billionaire tech mogul who had unknowingly fathered 2 children with his ex-wife, only to dismiss them for years. News outlets had a field day with the headlines, calling him out for his cruelty toward Vanessa and his neglect of his children. Social media exploded, and Richard's carefully curated public image began to crumble. The whispers in the office, once filled with admiration, now turned to judgment. His employees, once eager to work for the renowned Richard Harper, now questioned his leadership. Investors began pulling out, concerned about the damage to the company's reputation. The tech mogul who had built his empire on the foundation of precision, control, and success was now a pariah. The business he had spent years building, a carefully crafted image of perfection, was at risk of falling apart. Richard was forced to face a truth he had been avoiding for years. His own actions had led him here. His arrogance, his need to maintain an image of control and perfection had alienated everyone around him. He had made it clear that appearances mattered more than anything else, and now, that perfect world he had fought so hard to create was slipping through his fingers. Olivia, his wife, was the first to confront him. She had been silent in the aftermath of the baby shower, quietly absorbing the shock of it all. But now, the tension between them had become too much to ignore. "You need to talk to me, Richard." Olivia's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. Her eyes, once full of admiration for him, now seemed distant, guarded. "You need to tell me what's going on." Richard turned to her, his heart heavy with regret. He had never thought his actions would lead to this moment, but here it was. His life unraveling before him, and Olivia, the woman he had chosen to build a family with, was questioning everything. "I don't know what to say," Richard admitted, his voice strained. "I didn't know. I didn't want to know." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "You didn't want to know? You didn't want to know that you had 2 children? You didn't think that mattered?" Richard's shoulders sagged. "I was too focused on my image, on my business, on this perfect life I was building. I thought—" He stopped, realizing how hollow his words sounded. How could he have been so blind? "Richard," Olivia said, her voice shaking with frustration, "this isn't just about your image. This is about responsibility. This is about your children, the same children you ignored. And now, you're going to have to face them." The words stung. Richard knew they were true, but hearing them from Olivia's lips made him feel even more alone. He had failed her. He had failed his children. And now, as the public humiliation continued to unfold around him, he couldn't escape the realization that he had lost something far more important than his public image. The calls from his investors came next. They were blunt, asking him what he planned to do to address the crisis. They wanted a statement, something to placate the media and restore confidence in the company. But Richard wasn't sure he could fix this. His focus had always been on the next deal, the next product launch, but now it was on something he couldn't control. His past. His failures. The media didn't care about his explanations. They only cared about the scandal, the billionaire who had built an empire at the cost of his own family. His company's stock price plummeted. Articles painted him as the villain, as the man who had built his success on the backs of those he had cast aside. Richard felt powerless. The guilt he had ignored for years was now all-encompassing, and no matter how much he tried to drown it in work, no matter how much he tried to salvage his company, there was no escaping the truth. The twins were his, and now he had to find a way to live with the consequences. But the road to redemption wouldn't be easy. Richard had a long way to go before he could make amends, not just to Vanessa, but to the children he had failed. And with each passing day, the weight of his choices pressed down on him more and more. His life, once so carefully constructed, had now become a battlefield, and he was the one left to face the aftermath of his actions. The weight of his decisions had finally caught up to Richard, and there was no denying it anymore. Each day felt like an endless parade of reminders that he had made a grave mistake, a mistake that not only affected his personal life, but also his business and public image. As he stared at the quiet, still reflection in his office window, the faces of the twins haunted him. His sons. His children. And he hadn't been there for them. The realization stung like nothing he had ever experienced before. But now, with the DNA results confirmed and the media fallout in full force, there was nothing left to hide from. Richard had to face the truth. His arrogance, his dismissive attitude toward Vanessa, his obsession with perfection. It had all led him to this moment of reckoning. He knew what he had to do. If he had any hope of regaining his own humanity, of salvaging anything from the wreckage of his life, he needed to reach out to Vanessa. Not just for his own sake, but for the children he had never known. His fingers hovered over his phone screen, unsure of how to begin. The image of Vanessa's calm face at the baby shower, standing firm and unshaken as she introduced the twins, flashed before him. She had been right all along. She had given him a chance to be a father, and he had refused it. Now, there was only one option left: to apologize. To admit his mistakes, no matter how humiliating it was. He took a deep breath and typed out the message. Vanessa, I know I've hurt you. I've been blinded by my need for control, for perfection, and I've ignored what really mattered. I regret the way I treated you, and I'm sorry for dismissing you and the children. I'm asking for a chance to be part of their lives, if you'll allow me. I'll do whatever it takes to prove myself. Richard. He stared at the screen for a moment longer before hitting send. The apology felt like the smallest, most inadequate gesture in the world, but it was all he could offer. He set the phone down, leaning back in his chair, and let the silence fill the room. There was no turning back now. He had sent the message. Now, he had to wait. It didn't take long for Vanessa to respond. His heart raced as he read her reply. I'm not sure if your apology is enough. You've hurt me, and you've hurt your children. I'm willing to allow you to see them, but only under one condition. You must prove that you can be a stable, responsible father. This isn't about fixing your image, Richard. This is about the children. You will earn your place in their lives. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for them. Her words were firm, unyielding, and Richard understood. She was right to be cautious. After all, he had spent years denying his responsibility, and now he expected her to just open the door to him? It wasn't that simple. And it shouldn't be. Richard sat back in his chair, his thoughts swirling. He had no idea what it would take to convince Vanessa that he was worthy of the chance to be a father to his sons. What had he done, after all, to deserve that? He had abandoned her when she needed him most. He had abandoned the children before they were even born, and for years he had built his perfect life on the ashes of that abandonment. But something had shifted inside him. The arrogance he had once worn like a suit of armor was gone, replaced by something raw, something unfamiliar. Humility. And it terrified him. He wanted to change. He had to change. The thought of losing this chance to make things right was unbearable. For the first time in his life, Richard realized that he couldn't control everything. He couldn't control how Vanessa felt. He couldn't control the way the world viewed him. But he could control how he acted moving forward. And that was all he had left. He wasn't sure how to prove himself, but he knew he would have to start by proving to Vanessa that his commitment wasn't just about redeeming his public image. It wasn't about saving his reputation or reclaiming the picture-perfect life he had spent years constructing. It was about his sons. It was about becoming the father they deserved. Richard's mind was racing, but he knew there was only one place to start. A meeting with Vanessa. He needed to hear from her directly what she expected of him, what steps he had to take to show her, and more importantly, his children, that he was worthy of their trust. The next day, Richard reached out again, this time asking for a face-to-face meeting with Vanessa. It was the first time he'd felt genuinely vulnerable in years. "I'll meet you tomorrow," came her reply. "But understand this. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for the children. You've got a long road ahead of you if you want to be part of their lives." Richard's chest tightened. It was the harsh reality of the situation, but it was also exactly what he needed to hear. This wasn't going to be easy. Nothing worth having ever was. The meeting took place in a small cafe, tucked away in the quieter part of town. It was a neutral ground, a place where neither of them had any personal stake. Vanessa arrived on time, as always, with an air of calm confidence. Richard felt out of place as she sat across from him, her arms crossed, eyes watchful. "I'm here, Richard," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Now you need to prove you're not the same man who walked away all those years ago." Richard nodded, the weight of her words settling deep into his bones. "I'm not the same man. I've realized that. I can't undo what I've done, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. For the boys. For you." Vanessa's expression remained neutral, but her eyes softened, just the slightest bit. "You've hurt me, Richard. You've hurt them. You don't get to just waltz in and expect things to go back to how they were. You've got to prove you're serious. This is about them, not you." "I know that," Richard said, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I need a chance to be a father, to make up for the years I wasn't there." Vanessa looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "You'll start by spending time with them. No excuses. And you'll do it on my terms. I won't let you use them to fix your reputation." Richard felt the full weight of her words. This wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But it was a start. And for the first time in a long while, Richard felt a flicker of hope. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice steady. "I want to be the father they deserve." Vanessa didn't smile, but there was something in her eyes that told him she believed him. Or at least, She was willing to let him try. "Good," she said, standing up to leave. "Prove it." As Richard watched her walk away, he realized how much he had to prove, not just to her, but to himself. This was his chance. A chance to start over, to rewrite his story, and to become the father he had never been. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Richard was willing to walk it. The early morning sunlight filtered through the large glass windows of the Harper residence, casting a warm glow across the immaculate living room. But the serene beauty of the house couldn't disguise the tension that had been building for weeks now. Richard sat at the kitchen table, staring at his phone, trying to will the words he had just typed into existence. There was another message waiting for Vanessa, another attempt to show that he was serious about being a father. Yet despite all the effort, a part of him still felt hollow. Across the room, Olivia moved silently, her pregnant belly rounding out as she cleaned up the breakfast dishes. The soft clink of the plates and the hum of the coffee machine seemed out of place, a constant reminder of how fractured things had become. It had been a week since his last meeting with Vanessa, and though things had started to feel like they were improving with his sons, his marriage to Olivia was beginning to crumble. The perfection that he had worked so hard to create was falling apart, piece by piece. Olivia, once so eager to support him in everything, had started to question him. She had watched as he chased after redemption in one corner of his life, while leaving her and their child to fester in another. Richard had been so consumed with fixing his relationship with Vanessa and the twins that he had neglected the woman who had stood by him through everything. Now she was withdrawing, and Richard could feel it. "Richard." Olivia's voice broke through the silence, the words cold but laced with the exhaustion of too many sleepless nights. "We need to talk." Her tone sent a shiver down Richard's spine. He had been dreading this moment. He could feel it coming, the weight of it pressing against his chest. But he couldn't avoid it anymore. He needed to face it, just like everything else. He placed his phone down and turned to her, forcing a smile he didn't quite feel. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Olivia didn't return the smile. Instead, she folded her arms across her chest, standing tall, despite the discomfort she must have been feeling. "What's on my mind, Richard?" "Well, let's start with the fact that you've spent the last month obsessing over your ex-wife and your biological children, while I'm here, pregnant with our daughter, feeling completely ignored." "And I'm not just talking about the baby shower fiasco." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, a moment of vulnerability cutting through her anger. "I'm talking about the fact that you've spent more time with Vanessa and the twins than you have with me." Richard felt a pang of guilt stab at his heart. He had known it was coming, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words stuck in his throat. He had no defense. Nothing he said would fix the fracture that had grown between them. Nothing could undo the way he had prioritized his children from another relationship over the woman who was carrying his child, the woman he had promised to build a life with. "I'm sorry, Olivia," he said, his voice low. "I know I've been distant, but I'm trying. I'm trying to be a better father. I can't undo the past, but I'm doing everything I can to make it right." She shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "I'm not asking you to undo anything, Richard. I'm asking you to be present, to choose us, to choose me. But instead you're so focused on fixing this perfect image you've built for yourself that you're neglecting the family you already have. I'm not sure how much more I can take." Her words hit Richard like a ton of bricks, but they were true. He had become so obsessed with redeeming himself in the eyes of Vanessa and the twins that he had lost sight of what mattered most, his own marriage. Olivia had been his rock for so long, but now he was barely holding her together, and it hurt more than he wanted to admit. "I don't want to lose you," Richard said, his voice trembling now. "I never meant to make you feel like this." Olivia met his gaze, and for the first time in weeks, her eyes softened. "You need to choose, Richard. You can't keep running from your past while also trying to build a future with me. I love you, but I'm not sure I can keep doing this. I need to know if you're really committed to us. To me. Not just to the idea of a perfect life." Richard's mind raced. She was right. Everything had spiraled out of control, and now there were only two paths ahead of him: the life he had with Olivia and their unborn daughter, or the life he was attempting to build with Vanessa and the twins. Both lives demanded his full attention, his full devotion. He couldn't continue living with one foot in each world. He had always believed he could control everything: his success, his image, his relationships. But now, the consequences of his decisions were laying bare the reality that he could not have it all. He couldn't keep up the charade of the perfect family. He couldn't continue to chase the approval of his ex-wife while abandoning his current wife, the woman who had given him everything, including a family of their own. Richard stood up, pacing the floor, trying to sort through the overwhelming feelings that bombarded him. Olivia had been right all along. He had been blind to what really mattered, and now he had to make a choice he never thought he would have to face. The man who had always prided himself on his success, on his ability to make things happen, was now standing on the edge of losing everything: his marriage, his family, his reputation. "I don't know what to do, Olivia," Richard admitted, his voice breaking. "I've made a mess of everything." Olivia looked at him, her expression softening, but still tinged with doubt. "You need to figure it out, Richard, because I can't keep waiting for you to come back to me. I won't stay in a marriage where I'm not a priority." The ultimatum hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. Choose, Richard. Choose me, or choose them. Richard's heart sank. He had always believed that he could have it all, but now, faced with the reality of his choices, he knew that wasn't possible. Olivia deserved someone who could be fully present, someone who could give her the love and attention she had always given him. And the twins, they deserved a father who could be there for them, someone who wasn't consumed by the need to repair his own broken image. The silence between them was deafening. Olivia's words echoed in his mind, and the choice seemed to loom over him like a storm cloud. Richard felt the weight of the decision crushing him, but he knew he had to choose. He couldn't keep going like this, torn between two families, unable to commit to either one fully. For the first time in his life, Richard knew that the decisions he had made in the past would define his future. And no matter how badly he wanted to fix everything, the damage had already been done. Olivia stood up from the table, wiping away a single tear that escaped from her eye. "I think we need some time apart, Richard," she said quietly. "I need to think about what I want, and so do you." Richard nodded, his throat tight, and watched her walk out of the room. He felt the space between them grow, the rift widening with every step she took. He couldn't blame her, not anymore. As he sat alone in the now silent kitchen, Richard realized that he had not only lost his way, but he was also on the verge of losing the woman who had once been his everything. The perfect life he had built, his career, his image, his family, was slipping through his fingers, and for the first time he didn't know how to fix it. The sound of laughter echoed through the spacious living room, a warmth that had been absent for far too long. Richard sat on the edge of the couch, his eyes focused on the two boys running around in the yard, their high-pitched giggles filling the air. He smiled, though it was a small, tentative one. There was still so much to be done, so much to repair. But today was different. Today things felt possible. For the past several months, Richard had thrown himself into his new role as a father. It hadn't been easy. The first few weeks after the paternity test results were confirmed had been full of awkward silences, tense meetings, and uncomfortable conversations. Vanessa had been cautious, rightfully so, and Richard had known he didn't deserve her trust. But he was determined. Every day he worked at it, trying to prove himself worthy of his sons and the second chance he'd been given. It was early morning when Richard first began his journey. He had enrolled in parenting classes, something he never thought he'd need. He had thought he knew it all. He was a billionaire, after all, with a perfect image and the world at his feet. But as he sat in those classes, listening to other parents talk about the highs and lows of raising children, he realized just how little he knew. The lessons were humbling, and often the instructor's words stung like a cold slap of reality. He had been absent when it mattered most, and now he was paying the price. But there was more to it than just showing up for the classes. Richard had to work on himself. For the first time in his life, he acknowledged the emotional walls he'd built over the years, the arrogance, the need for control, the need for perfection. Those things had clouded his ability to connect with people, especially with the people who mattered the most. Vanessa, his sons, even Olivia, had all been collateral damage in his pursuit of the perfect life. It was in therapy sessions, late nights spent listening to a stranger's voice asking him to dig deeper, that Richard started to understand the root of his actions. His fear of imperfection had driven him to push people away, to reject anything that didn't fit his carefully curated world. But the more he opened up, the more he realized that he had been afraid of vulnerability, of letting people see his flaws. In trying to maintain control, he had lost everything that truly mattered. One afternoon, Richard sat on a park bench, waiting for his sons to arrive. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the quiet space. It had become a ritual, these afternoons with the twins. They loved to run, to play, and Richard loved watching them, learning from them. In their innocence, they taught him more about life than he had ever known. As he watched the boys race toward him, their identical faces lit up with excitement, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. His sons didn't need him to be perfect. They didn't need him to have all the answers. They just needed him to be there. That was something he could do. "Dad!" one of the boys shouted as they reached him, and the word sent a rush of warmth through Richard's chest. "Hey, buddy," Richard said, lifting the child into his arms. For a brief moment, he could forget about everything else: his strained marriage with Olivia, the media backlash, the weight of his past mistakes. Here, with his sons, life felt simple. They loved him. And that love, however small the moments were, felt real. At home that night, Richard found Vanessa sitting on the couch, her eyes focused on a book, but he knew her well enough by now to recognize the tension in her posture. She wasn't one to wear her emotions on her sleeve, but he had learned to read the subtle shifts in her demeanor. It was one of the lessons he had taken from their time apart. Pay attention. Really pay attention. He took a deep breath and sat down beside her. "How was your day?" he asked softly, giving her space to answer however she wanted. Vanessa glanced at him briefly before returning her gaze to the pages of her book. "It was fine." Richard nodded. The distance between them was still there, but it had been slowly shrinking, The last few months had been full of small victories, little steps in the right direction. He had learned to show up when he said he would, to respect her boundaries, to be patient with her. She had been wary at first, but Richard could see that she was starting to soften. It was slow, but it was progress. "I was thinking," he started, hesitant but wanting to say the right thing. "Maybe we could take the boys to the zoo this weekend. Just the four of us. No distractions. I want to do something for them. For us." Vanessa looked up from the book, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Richard held his breath, unsure of how she would respond. But then, to his surprise, she nodded slowly. "That sounds nice," she said quietly. Richard felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It was a small thing, but it meant more than he could express. It was a sign that things were changing, even if just a little. They were moving forward, together. Meanwhile, Olivia was grappling with her own feelings. Richard's efforts, while appreciated, had not gone unnoticed, but they had come at a cost. She had tried to be supportive, tried to believe in the man she had married, but the truth was that their relationship had never fully healed. Olivia had spent so many years building her own career and identity that she had forgotten what it felt like to be a priority. Richard's emotional withdrawal had eroded her trust, and although he was trying to be better, she wasn't sure if she could allow herself to fully believe in his transformation. One evening, after putting their daughter to bed, Olivia sat across from Richard at the dinner table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Richard," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I need to ask you something." Richard looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" Olivia took a deep breath, gathering the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Do you really think you can change? Can you really be the man I need you to be? The man our daughter deserves?" Richard paused, the question hitting him harder than he had anticipated. He had spent so much time focusing on proving himself to Vanessa and the twins, on repairing the shattered image of his life, that he had neglected to fully address the cracks in his marriage with Olivia. "I'm trying," he said, his voice low.
"I don't expect everything to be fixed overnight, but I'm committed to being better. For you, for our family." Olivia met his gaze, her eyes searching for sincerity. "I want to believe that, Richard. But I can't keep living like this, not knowing if you're really here or if you're still holding on to the past. If you want this marriage, if you want us, you have to prove it. And it's not just about the twins anymore. It's about us." Richard's heart sank as he realized the depth of the gap between them. Olivia had been right all along. He had been trying so hard to fix everything else that he hadn't put the same effort into the woman who had always been by his side. He needed to show her that he was there for her, that she mattered, that their family was worth fighting for. "I'll do whatever it takes," Richard said, his voice filled with determination. "I know I've hurt you, but I want to prove to you, to all of you, that I can be the man you deserve." As Richard continued to rebuild his relationship with his sons, Vanessa and Olivia, he began to see the truth in what he had learned. Family wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about maintaining a flawless image or striving for some unattainable ideal. It was about growth, about learning from mistakes, and about showing up when it mattered most. Though his journey was far from over, Richard had finally started down the path to redemption. The lessons he had learned, the hard way, had given him a new understanding of what it meant to be a father, a husband, and a man. And while the future remained uncertain, for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face it. The only thing that mattered now was taking the next step, one day at a time.